Few rewards in gaming are as satisfying to collect as the pieces of heart found throughout the Legend of Zelda franchise. The tangible progression that comes from finding one of these collectibles is usually so rewarding and fulfilling, but every now and then there is a piece of heart that feels like a complete and total letdown when you finally get it. I've already covered what I consider to be the very worst heart piece in the series in a separate video that you can check out in the description below, so in this video I thought we could take a look at 3 more terrible heart pieces in The Legend of Zelda. I'll break down each one and explain why I think it's so disappointing or frustrating, but please let me know which pieces of heart you think are among the worst in the series down in the comments. And of course be sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell if you want to see more Zelda content just like this. Thanks, now let's start with a quick honorable mention. Before we get into the list proper, I wanted to give an honorable mention to all pieces of heart locked behind a skill-based minigame. That might sound weird, but in my previous heart piece video, I got so many comments talking about one minigame or another being the very worst in the franchise that I wanted to acknowledge how bad they can be. Now, the reason I'm lumping them all together in this honorable mention is because I don't think they fit my criteria for what makes a piece of heart terrible. While they can occasionally have some janky controls that are hard to get used to, my issues often stem not from the minigames themselves, but rather my lack of skill when playing them, and just because I'm bad at something doesn't make the thing itself bad. In order for me to consider a piece of heart terrible, there needs to be some degree of a universal negative experience to it, some aspect or element that every player has to deal with. For me, my negative minigame experience is with the Clocktown shooting gallery in Majora's Mask, but I know for many it was the pumpkin shooting challenge in Skyward Sword, which is a game I crush whenever I play it. I don't say that to flex, but rather to illustrate that what one person finds difficult, another may not, as I'm sure plenty of people had no trouble at all getting a perfect in the Clocktown shooting gallery. That's why I'm copping out to some degree and putting all skill-based minigames in as my honorable mention. From the sled race against the Yetis in Twilight Princess, to playing Octoball in A Link Between Worlds, it's easy to see how certain minigames can stump players for hours, if not altogether. And even if that's mainly due to user error, I think we can all agree that it still sucks when it happens, turning an otherwise good reward into a terrible one. When I think of heart pieces that make me miserable, the one earned from delivering a barrel of hot spring water to a tired Goron in Twilight Princess immediately comes to mind. It requires you to navigate the eastern portion of Hyrule Field without getting hit by any enemies, which is easier said than done as you aren't able to defend yourself as you hold the barrel overhead. Instead, you have to set the barrel down in order to use your weapons to take out the bulblins and levers that are harassing you, which comes with its own risks as it takes away from the little time you have to deliver the water before it cools down and becomes useless. However, if you choose not to fight the enemies, you run the risk of having to restart the delivery from the Kakariko village entrance, as a single hit will destroy your precious cargo. While this seems like a fun risk-reward scenario, in practice it's infuriating because it's extremely easy to get hit. You can quickly find yourself on your 5th or 6th attempt of this if you don't know a good route to take, and repeating the same bit of gameplay over and over gets old very quickly. Thankfully, there is a route that makes this significantly easier, as you will naturally avoid all but 1 or 2 enemies, but without that knowledge, this can take quite a few tries to succeed. But while you can make an argument for this section being engaging because of the challenge, it's the prerequisite to even attempt the delivery that really elevates this piece of heart as one of the worst rewards in the series. Before you can start the delivery process, you must first restore the bridge to Hyrule Castle Town by donating rupees to a Goron in the Kakariko Village General Store. In order to do so, you will need 1,000 total rupees, which is far too much for the point in the game in which you unlock the quest. Even when accounting for the rupees you can earn from selling bugs to Agatha, 1,000 rupees is still an extremely high number to require for a number of reasons. The first is that you will have to purchase other things in the game prior to this, cutting into the amount that you can save leading up to this. The next is that you will have to return multiple times to donate because you can't even hold 1,000 rupees until you've acquired the Giant's Wallet in the original or the Big Wallet in Twilight Princess HD, both of which are unlocked after this quest is. And finally, 1,000 rupees is too much because there is already another piece of heart earned for donating 1,000 rupees to a man in Hyrule Castletown, so how can we justify doing that again plus multiple other steps for the same reward? I haven't even mentioned the fact that you have to journey out to talk to the Goron first before rescuing him is made available, which while not bad on its own, feels like a slightly pointless extra step to take. It only adds more time to a mission you'll likely already have to grind for because of the rupees required, and I wish you could skip that step and get straight to the delivery. That's a minor nitpick for sure, but if the Goron outside Malomar already knows the location of the tired Goron, I don't see any reason to go back and forth. While this isn't the worst piece of heart in the series, it's easily the worst in all of Twilight Princess, and if you have ever felt the pain of making it all the way to the young Goron and accidentally missing your throw, forcing you to make the whole trip again, you understand just how bad it can be. While on their own, each part of this quest isn't terrible, the fact that you must complete both before earning the piece of heart is what makes it one of the 5 worst in the franchise's history. And though I understand that this quest is technically just the first few steps in a larger quest with a more satisfying and unique reward, I don't think that justifies how much work is needed if your only goal is just that piece of heart. Wind Waker has some of the worst heart pieces in the franchise. However, the one that stands above all the others as the worst in that game is the one earned through the massive trading sequence. By talking with Zuno on Windfall Island, we can begin a fetch quest where we find traveling salesmen with whom we can trade various items, ultimately netting us a piece of heart when we've traded the appropriate items required to get it. Most who've played this understand just how daunting a task this is, even with a guide, but allow me to give you some context if you're unfamiliar. We're talking about a minimum of 560 rupees required and 10 trades across 7 stops to complete this trading sequence and get the heart piece we're after, and that's if we're being as efficient as possible. The main problem is that you just can't warp to each island that you need to go. Of the 3 islands you will repeatedly visit, only Great Fish Isle can be directly warped to, meaning you will have to warp elsewhere and then sail to either Bomb Island or the Mother and Child Isles, which actually does have a warp point that you just can't use for this quest. This is frustrating because at first glance it doesn't seem so bad because there are warp points and squares adjacent to the islands you can't warp to, but due to the amount of trades required, the time spent sailing definitely adds up. And again, this is with the knowledge of where to go and the most efficient order, because there's no telling how much time this could take a person who is doing this blind. It's extremely easy to waste time and rupees during this quest without a guide, because you must trade specific items at specific locations to progress. For example, after acquiring the sea flower from the salesman on Great Fish Isle, you may not intuitively think to try trading it back to him, which is what you need to do. It's very realistic to think that someone would leave and head to the Mother and Child Isles, or Bomb Isle, or both, only to realize they've hit a dead end and now have to make their way back to Great Fish Isle to continue. Or perhaps you could accidentally head to Mother and Child Isles after picking up the big sail flag, where now you'll likely wind up spending an unnecessary 85 rupees for the big catch flag that could be completely skipped if your only goal is the piece of heart at the end. Unfortunately, it's a huge time sink even without mistakes, taking upwards of 30 to 40 minutes even when using the Swift Sail in Wind Waker HD. However, I genuinely think it could all be forgiven if this simply just wasn't also an extremely boring quest. What makes something like the Savage Labyrinth piece of heart not qualify for this list is that despite the time it takes to earn, the entire time you are actively engaged. You're battling hordes of enemies and feel a constant sense of progression as you move from floor to floor, and you never feel like you're wasting your time because it's fun. Contrast that with the extremely mundane gameplay of the trading quest, where a vast majority of time is spent warping and sailing the Great Sea, and you can quickly see why this quest is such a drag to complete. And while you could argue that it isn't so bad if you complete it gradually as you progress through the game, I'd still find fault in how uninteresting the whole ordeal is. None of the characters are particularly memorable or say anything of note, and Zuno's overarching storyline isn't really satisfying either. In fact, when I think of other quests in Wind Waker like reuniting Maggie and her father, reconnecting the killer bees with their teacher, or getting 2 people to reveal their secret feelings for one another, it makes me realize how meaningless the trading sequence feels. I suppose the one redeeming quality is that you unlock different statues to place around Windfall Island, which is nice to give the island a slightly personalized feel, but because it doesn't make that big of an impact to the island's appearance, I honestly could not care less about that aspect. It also doesn't help that after your third trade in the sequence, you get a much more valuable and unique item than a piece of heart in the magic armor, making the quest's final reward seem lame by comparison. Considering the developers have cited the Strawman Millionaire story as an influence for trading quests like these, it'd make more sense to end up with something extraordinary rather than one of the most common collectibles in the grand scheme of the franchise. I really feel these two rewards should have been swapped because not only would it make the piece of heart far easier to get, but it'd also make the trading sequence feel more satisfying to complete if you got something cool and special at the end. Truly, there is no worse quest in Wind Waker, and if not for our next piece of heart, this would be the worst heart piece in a 3D Zelda game. While the Music House piece of heart in The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap is the clear worst heart piece in the series, I believe the one earned for completing the Donjuro choir quest in The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is a clear number 2. This side quest is one of the most convoluted in the entire series, and the fact that the grand reward for completing it is a piece of heart and not a heart container or better is truly mind-blowing. The amount of steps required to complete this, and the amount of backtracking it entails truly makes it the worst piece of heart in any 3D Zelda game to date, and unless something horrible happens in the next entry to the series, I don't see that changing anytime soon. To illustrate just how bad it is, allow me to walk you through all the things you need to do step by step to obtain Majora's Mask's worst piece of heart. To start, we head to the Goron village where inside the Goron shrine we can find several unlit torches that we can light as Link. Upon doing so, a chandelier begins to spin at the top of the room with Goron-faced pots that we can break using the Goron mask by ramping off the top floor. Doing this, we can uncover a rock sirloin, a delicacy amongst the Gorons that we can bring to a shivering, hungry Goron in the mountain village. After devouring the rock sirloin and regaining his strength, the now satisfied Goron thanks us by handing over the Donjuro's mask he was wearing, allowing us to move into the next phase of our quest. With Donjuro's mask in tow, we now make our way to Snowhead Temple where we must defeat its boss Goat in order to lift the curse on the Snowhead region and bring spring back to the mountains. Doing this allows us to speak with a frog sitting near the smithy's house who will tell us that we can't conduct the performance while the other members of the choir are absent. At which point Link needs to travel throughout the world and find frogs that he can speak to using the Donjuro's mask. Doing so will send them to the mountains, and when all members are present, the performance can finally begin. However, these frogs are spread throughout all of Termina and are somewhat hard to find if you aren't familiar with their locations. In total, 5 frogs must be spoken to while wearing the Donjuro's mask, with the first one being right in the Clocktown laundry pool. The next is on a random log in the southern swamp as you're headed towards the Deku Palace, and the last 2 are found in dungeons, specifically Woodfall Temple and Great Bay Temple, within the Gecko mini-bosses that you must defeat. Finally, of course, is the frog and Snowhead I mentioned earlier, who will complement our conducting and reward us with a heart piece. Now, obviously, that is an absurd amount of steps for one piece of heart, but each section of the quest comes with its own set of problems. From the start, we have issues, as uncovering the rock sirloin is completely random, meaning you could get lucky and get it after breaking the first pot, or you could be stuck repeatedly climbing back up to the top floor to try and break them all. It's definitely annoying because it requires a degree of timing that gets harder to nail the less pots there are, so when you get unlucky, it feels like you really got unlucky. It's funny too because in an alternate universe, I could easily see a piece of heart being the reward for smashing the pots, which further reinforces in my head how ridiculous all this effort is for one heart piece. The next major issue is in having to defeat the geckos in both Woodfall and Great Bay temples, because there is practically no chance someone is doing this in one cycle on their first playthrough. This inevitably means backtracking deep into both temples and refighting the same mini-boss for the 3rd and 4th time respectively, which feels repetitive and unnecessary. It especially feels bad in contrast to refighting Goat to bring spring to the mountains, because at least there is a warp at the beginning of the dungeon that brings you right to the battle, which while still annoying is at least less time consuming. And even after all that, you'll still have to journey to the southern swamp and Clocktown before returning to the mountain village. Frankly, that is a level of backtracking that I just can't stand, and I really don't know that any reward would justify all that repetitive gameplay. The worst part is that if the final frog didn't require you to defeat the gecko in Great Bay Temple, this could be completed so much more naturally. Needing you to progress that far into the game virtually guarantees that you will have to reset time, which might not have been necessary for most if the last frog could be found in Termina Field or Romani Ranch as examples. To me, that's this quest's greatest sin, because like many others, I've experienced that sinking feeling after completing Snowhead Temple of realizing I'd wasted my time finding every frog except the one that I didn't have access to yet. While this piece of heart may not be difficult to get per se, it can be extremely frustrating at points and ultimately winds up being a huge disappointment. As I said earlier, heart pieces should be quick and easy to obtain, and there is a fine line that is easy to cross where the effort required no longer justifies the reward. Don Giroux's Choir is a quest that doesn't just cross that line, it Hulk leaps over it, and truly encapsulates everything that can make a piece of heart terrible. A touch of RNG, a ton of backtracking, an excessive amount of steps, and a huge time commitment, all for the same reward that you can get by climbing a tree. I stand by the Music House piece of heart being the worst in all of Zelda, but hopefully now you can see why I consider this to be firmly number 2. Overall, despite the negative nature of this video, I do enjoy collecting heart pieces in Zelda games and always will. It always feels good to heal to full strength, and it's nice to feel like you're growing stronger. It's just that sometimes those positives are outweighed by the negatives of the quest to get there. We looked at 3 terrible examples in this video, but I'm sure you all have some pieces of heart that you hate as well. Let me know down in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching.